Anyways, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our webinar, How Manufacturers Can Improve S&OP Processes Using Supply Chain Data. My name is Olivia. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for the OWL Solutions. Essentially, we help manufacturing companies improve their supply chain performance through data analytics. We have an amazing panel of speakers today. I will introduce them momentarily. Before we get into that, though, I would love to just explain a brief overview of what S&OP is. For those of you who don't know, I'm assuming most of you probably know, but essentially sales and operations planning is a core business process that provides a framework for decision-making, making supply and demand trade-offs visible to integrated strategic and tactical planning across different departments. So why is this important? Essentially, it helps companies make better decisions, use their resources more efficiently, and improve their overall business performance. So passing it off now, I will introduce our wonderful speakers, give you a little bit of a brief overview of them, and then we can dive right in. So Marcia, we'll start with you. So Marcia Williams is the founder and managing partner of USM Supply Chain Consulting. She has over 18 years of experience optimizing supply chain finance planning for large, fast-growing CPG companies. Some of them you may have heard of, Hershey's and Lindt Chocolate. So welcome, Marcia. Then we also
Thank you so much.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah. We also have Dyci Manns Sfregola, and she is the CEO of New Gen Architects. So she is a digital operations consultant and supply chain trainer who helps executives and businesses improve their supply chain processes and digital implementations for profitable and sustainable growth. Hello, Dyci. Give everyone a wave. And then we also have Raymond Khan. So he is the VP of supply chain at Wonder Brands. So he's an experienced supply chain professional who previously led the Supply Chain Center of Excellence at Jameson, overseeing their integrated business planning across all business units. Now as the VP of supply chain, he manages end-to-end supply chain operations to ensure efficiency, cost effectiveness, and alignment with the company's strategic goals. So hello, Raymond. And then we also have, last but not least, Hugo Fuentes, who is the CEO of this OWL Solutions. He will be moderating our panel discussion today. So Hugo has over 25 years of experience working in supply chain for manufacturing companies across North and South America. He brings a wealth of experience to today's discussion as well. So I will pass it off to you, Hugo, to kick us off.
Amazing. Thank you, Olivia, and hi, everyone. Happy to be here and joined by this group of amazing panelists today. And so the first thing that I wanted to say before we sort of jump into questions and the rest of this conversation is essentially share a couple of slides with you just to provide context. I'm not going to go through the specific details on each slide, but I think that it's super important to understand the reason why we're here and why we're here, why this topic is relevant, and hopefully is relevant to all of you as well. So I'm going to share my screen very, very briefly, just to give you a little bit of perspective. And I like visuals, and I think this visual that I'm sharing here perhaps sort of represents the life of the S&OP person. So it may look like something very, very challenging. It may look like, you know, your business objectives are going through that very, very high mountain up there. And sometimes it feels very lonely, right? If you are an S&OP practitioner, many times it feels like you have to go through a lot of challenges in order to achieve your business objectives. And sometimes you feel alone. And so we're here to discuss, and today we're going to be discussing more and more how sort of the different enablement pieces can help you essentially succeed in S&OP. I've been doing S&OP for more than 20 years, and perhaps one of my biggest realizations by implementing S&OP across different organizations is that it's not a single variable game. It's a multi-variable game. You have to consider multiple things in order to make it successful. It's not only about data. It's not only about people. It's not only about processes. It's the integration of those three things. And so therefore, from my experience, the specific levers that you can use in order to enable your S&OP process are around people, process, and data. And I use the word data specifically. I don't use the word technology. I use the word data because I think data is what essentially represents more the challenge or one of the key components of S&OP. And again, I'm not going to go through each of the specific things here, but if you feel represented in your journey in S&OP, either if you're started or you are thinking about starting, if you feel like some of the things that you read here on this slide represent some of the things that you're going through, some signs that maybe like you have some room for improvement in your process, check them out, right? I mean, things like, is your salespeople familiar with S&OP? Are your leaders in your executive team, they understand what's the value behind S&OP? When it comes to process, is marketing supposed to be part of S&OP? In which capacity? So some of the questions and things that you will see here represent some of the challenges practitioners face every single day when it comes to making S&OP successful in their organizations. Now, today, in this conversation, we're going to talk about some of the things that you will see here with a special focus on the green bullet point here, which is around how data and insights can really enable your S&OP for further success. And well, I'm going to kick things off by actually asking one question. I'm going to stop sharing my screen to all of you. So all the audience that is here today with us. So we're going to run a quick poll just to understand. So how are you guys interacting with S&OP? And if you are currently, so the question is, how many years has S&OP been in place within your organization today? Please pick your option. It could be option 1, between 0 to 1 years, option 2, 2 to 5, option 3, more than 5 years. So please pick your option, and we're going to give you a minute just to go through the answers. You can select your option right there in the screen. I think you can click on the 0 to 1, 2 to 5, more than 5, and then please hit on submit, the submit button, just to get your answers, please. So the question, Safa, is if you have an S&OP process today in place, how many years have you been on this journey? Between 0 to 1 years, between 0 to 1, 1 to 2, or more than 5? All right, so we got some answers here. We're gonna give it a minute or 30 seconds more, but essentially, again, the question was, how many years has S&OP been in place within your organization? And the options are 0 to 1 years, 2 to 5, or more than 5 years. Awesome. So we got the results right now. So essentially very balanced. So between 0 to 1 years, roughly 40% of people attending today is like starting with S&OP. Then you have between 2 to 5 years, 25%, and roughly 40% more than 5 years. So very, very balanced between people who is actually starting the process right now or in early stages, or people that has been running the process for some time now. So that's amazing. That's a great thing, because we can have like a dialogue depending on the different levels of maturity in this journey. So the first question, and Ray, I would love to start with you in terms of like understanding from your perspective and your experience running S&OP in a large enterprise or corporation like Jamieson Wellness. What are, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges that manufacturers see today with their supply chain data when it comes to enabling S&OP or IVP?
Yeah, thanks, Hugo. And I would say, like, at multiple places, not just at Jameson, but various places where I've seen led or supported S&OP and IBP implementation. The biggest challenge, even before I get to the data, I'll just speak around the nature of the systems. And the biggest piece is there are multiple systems, and the issue is it's not integrated. So, if you think about how companies grow, whether it be organically with maybe someone who was a guru in IT that built this homegrown system that we kept adding on to it, or through M&A activity where a company gets larger and a company buys another company that buys another company, and now you have multiple systems in your environment, and trying to get data and making sense out of it is truly challenging. So the lack of integration, I would say, would probably be the foundation, or the foundational issues were just the nature of what it is for a lot of places where we're at, as a starting point. But recognizing that is really important. So I would say multiple systems and lack of integration, number one. Number two would be probably, again, based on the nature of growth or those multiple systems, the lack of synergy between master data from those multiple systems. It's like trying to compare apples to oranges and doing so in a timely manner. And supporting decision-making is extremely difficult. So master data, I'll call it lack of harmonization, is issue number two that I've seen. And lastly, based on just this, I'll call it the labor of love for most supply chain and operations people to pull data to make it make sense and make it meaningful, because it's so challenging. The thing that we always resort back to, the thing that we can trust, is ultimately things that look backward. So lagging indicators, whether it be fill rate, attainment, forecast accuracy, output, whatever it is, we tend to look backwards because that's the data that we can get and that's the data that we trust, versus leading indicators and looking forward kind of in the supply chain, which is really what it's all about, which is taking the right action at the right time. So with those things, I would say that's what I would consider the typical pitfalls, but it's also where a lot of creativity and inspiration comes from as well. That's what I'd say.
That's great, and I love that quote, the labor of love from supply chain practitioners, right?
Every month, every morning when that short report's due, there's 6 reports behind it, but that's the nature of where a lot of companies start at the beginning of their S&OP journey, which makes it a challenge.
Yeah. Any comment or additional insights, Dyci or Marcia, on that specific question or the point that Ray was making?
Are we specifically focusing on large enterprises?
I mean, in general.
Because in not large enterprises, I am the person in the middle of the mountain that no one knows what S&OP even means. So like, that's a challenge. Getting on the phone with people and saying, hey, I'm really focusing on trying to build out a robust S&OP process and understand like what data points you even have and where you're getting it from. And then having people say, what do those letters mean? That's a big challenge. The picture that you showed first, I was like, oh, that's me there in the middle alone. Maybe the other 70 people here feel the same way. So indeed, misery loves company. I will know that other people here with me in some other world where I can't see them are feeling the same way when I'm having these conversations. So on like the small, medium side, just literally the education or lack thereof of like, what is S&OP? On the larger enterprise side, from what I've seen, is companies that call their annual operating plan or a demand plan or like a weekly execution as S&OP. So then there's this lack of true understanding of how to execute on an S&OP process. And, Tom wrote, which I completely agree with, years of execution and level of maturity do not correlate. So what I have seen some companies call S&OP, and they're not actually doing S&OP, or that they're at that very, very basic level of maturity, and they're just consistently doing that, over and over and over. And then very much to Raymond's experience as well is data. I remember trying to do and Marcia will probably appreciate this also, it was like a merchandise planning and corporate finance, like how do we share this data? And we ended up needing to do like an entire hierarchy change project with IT. And I was like, well, that's not going to happen. So what was the point of even doing this? Like, like where are we now? So, I would say data, and then just like a lack of understanding of what a true S&OP process is and how it's different from other planning or execution processes, and how it relates or supports, or, whatever that might be, are the two biggest things that I see.
Excellent. Marcia, anything to add there to that point before we ask sort of the next poll that we got here, just to create more interaction with our audience and capture some of the feedback that they may have? So any additional question to add around the challenges manufacturers see today with their supply chain data?
I am aligned with what Dyci and Ray have shared about understanding of what S&OP is. And also because typically S&OP is seen as something from supply chain. It's like, okay, that is supply chain thing. So even in large organizations, it's not clear who needs to be part of S&OP and how we need to communicate. It's very challenging, as you show, Hugo, with the mountain, but it's challenging, but we will see that the benefits are there. And about data, I think data is abundant, right? We have lots of data. I don't think that that is the issue, but to have the data in a way that we can use it. First, of course, we need to collect it, as Ray was mentioning, because if we don't have anything to work on, it's going to be challenging. But once we have the data, the key is to generate insights, those leading indicators, and not staying only with KPIs. That is where we can provide value. So those are my additions that were already covered, Hugo.
That's amazing. I think all great points. So we're gonna run our second poll today, just to get a little bit more interaction with our audience, as well as capture some of the feedback that they can provide us with. So the second question, I'm hoping that it gets, yes, it is here. So the question is, when you think about your toolbox today, when you think about the tools that if you're running S&OP in your organization today, so how that toolbox look like? So what's your S&OP primary data analytics tool today? And the answers are 4. I mean, of course, there might be more, but we have classified the potential answers in those 4 options here. So the first one, Excel. So essentially, I use spreadsheets, Excel, or an Access database. That's option 1. Option 2 is, we're implementing some data visualization tools or BI tools like Power BI, Tableau, ClickView, etc. Option 3 is that we have a cloud analytics platform that provide us with the S&OP information on a regular basis. And option 4 was experimenting already with more advanced things around machine learning, AI, etc., etc., etc. So just please pick your choice. I mean, one of those 4. What's your, again?
Hugo, what's the difference between a cloud analytics platform and a machine learning in this context?
Yeah, in this context, so option 3 would be more like, think about a software that it was developed specifically for supply chain metrics, okay. S&OP. And then the option 4 is more like, for instance, our IT team is leading an internal project to utilize Python or machine learning or any other tools to develop ad hoc specific reporting or analytics for our organization. So we're gonna give them, please, a minute to answer. And this is, again, information that is interesting for everyone here, just to sort of understand what's your level of maturity and in terms of the toolbox that you're using today.
I don't want to take over, but can I ask people to also include, just for the sake of our conversation, like maybe in the chat, which one they chose and how many people are like in their S&OP or supply chain team. So like if you're using a cloud analytics platform and there are 40 people Or if you're using Excel and there are 100 people.
Excellent. Good question. All right. So we got some answers. Thank you for providing your feedback.
Danielle, are you the one in Excel?
Excellent. I mean, we're seeing some of the results here, which is quite interesting to see. I think the numbers are relatively consistent with what we're seeing elsewhere. I mean, in previous polls that we have run in other circumstances and other events, I think we have come up with similar numbers. But essentially, what our team here, our audience is saying is that essentially 54% of them are using either Excel or an Access database. 31% is experimenting with data visualization tools like Power BI, Tableau, etc. 13% is using like a cloud analytics platform, and then around 2% is starting to experiment or experimenting already with some advanced methods like machine learning, AI, etc., etc., etc. So it's interesting. So a couple of months ago, I think we were attending an event in Boston where similar question was asked, and the numbers were actually quite consistent. In that event, it was an S&OP and IBP event. Roughly 70% of people mentioned Excel spreadsheets. So now very, very consistent with what we're seeing here, which actually, yes.
Hugo.
Yes.
Sorry, I should use raise my hand. I was too excited. But one of the things that I'm curious about, just with the team that responded, it just, if I could ask, how many hours a month do you spend preparing the data for S&OP? Maybe that's another question I'd be very interested in. Would it be, let's call it greater than 15 hours, greater than 10 hours, or something else? Just to ask the broader team here, how many hours do you spend a month preparing for S&OP?
That's low, right?
What's that?
So that's low. Setting the bar like very. I thought you were going to say 10 hours a week preparing the data.
Could be.
Yeah, Tom here is saying, man hours.
Yeah, man hour 150 to 180. Yeah.
Right.
A month. So Tom, that's 150 and 180 a month.
I mean, spread, of course.
Yeah.
It typically happens. It's like spread like across different people in the team. You may have some analysts dedicated to this function, but usually planners are also, spending time, demand planners, supply planners, inventory managers, buyers. Yeah, so 150. How many people?
How many days? Yeah, true. And that's
Ray is working with more mature side of S&OP to where his mind went to hours. And I was like, how many weeks to prepare the S&OP process that actually happens bi-monthly instead of every month?
I didn't want to go all the way to that side, but absolutely fair enough for the team to turn into days. But I think that's the point, right? Like in terms of like the challenges with data, this is the challenge with data. It takes weeks to get to or days to get to, like literally. So how are we going to move to insights if it takes us this long? So that's going to be part of the journey that we're on as S&OP practitioners. How do we improve that at your various place? Whether it be a business case, whether it be pleading your case, whether it be something, but just that ROI with what people are spending, their time on, and what are they getting out of it? That's really critical to continue to share that with the leaders in your organization and your team. It's a lot.
And what could happen is that after getting the data ready, now it's outdated. So that is a critical point, like how we can have the updates in an easy way, so the data that we work is still relevant.
Exactly. So latency, right? So data latency. That's something that is really impacting agility for organizations and their ability to run S&OP cycles in a much more effective way. So, and that leads me to actually, Marcia, to a question for you, which is from your perspective and your experience, like working with different organizations, implementing S&OP and helping them to achieve more. So how are those challenges that we just mentioned negatively impacting S&OP initiatives in general?
Yes, we need to have data and accurate to a certain point. We are not looking for perfection. So that's why I talk and I work about segmentations. So because everything is not the same. So we need to give priority to those items or to those customers, considering the financial impact and operations, of course, related to strategy. So we need to have data to work. And one point that we always talk about, one source or source of truth, that I know is challenging to achieve. And I wouldn't say that is not, without having that, we cannot have S&OP. I don't think it's up to that point. But something that we don't talk enough is about having one source for KPIs. That to agree on what KPIs we are going to measure, we are going to focus, and how, what sources of data, the calculations, the frequency. So I think we need to start on that. Something that we can achieve, we can improve, get agreement on that. So then we will be able to move, like to get more insight of the data, spend more time on that and not on collecting. And as we were talking, that those situations, right, that we need to get these reports to look at, and then when we are going to show, they are not valid anymore. So I would start with source of truth, but for KPIs.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Essentially, you're talking about latency. You're talking about like having one single place that provides trust across the organization around data. So that single place where everyone can go and check, right, their numbers. So that's a very important point. Now, Dyci, from your perspective, and when you think about like your clients, your customers, and based on your experience also as a practitioner, so how do you think that manufacturers can overcome some of those challenges? In your experience, what are the things that you have seen working and working well, so manufacturers or people can, or distributors or people out there can overcome some of those challenges?
That assumes I've seen it work well. I don't think that anyone who I've ever worked with or who has hired me has something that's working well, because otherwise they wouldn't necessarily need me. Some things that I have seen improve, from what someone was doing to previously, I've seen a system work, like an actual software tool, but that was based off of a company that was very mature, medical devices, doing contract manufacturing. And they had a robust S&OP process that their SVP of supply chain had spent 2 years just trying to get executive leadership on board with being able to push down and have it be a cultural thing, as opposed to, what Marcia mentioned of like, oh, it's a supply chain thing. So he spent 10 years getting finance on board and sales on board and executive leadership on board. And then they implemented a point system, which a cloud analytics platform, that would create that source of truth, to bring in all of the systems or all the data from the different systems, and then be able to use that to identify KPIs. And then I even caveat that by saying, like, back up, but did that work? Because the same company called 6 months later to say, hey, nobody's using this. What did we do wrong? Like, what happened? So like, it was very positive when they were starting, but as these people learned how to configure the tool, well, they were then recruited to other companies and all of that knowledge was lost. So that's also something that we have to like be just very aware and I guess candid about, that we implement these processes, we implement these tools, we have this team that does it, but then how are we making sure that these are sustainable, you know, processes and results? So, you know, I hate to say I haven't seen it work well, but I haven't. You know, if someone is doing it well, they don't need me to be there. So I could go off like the best practices of like what ASCM tells you when you're doing your certification. But I think that most of us also know that in reality, those things don't work all the time, which is what I personally learned from consultant turned practitioner, is like, whoa, how much BS have I been telling people? like this is actually never going to happen. It just doesn't work that way. But I do think that, you know, like once you have a decent process, identifying that source of truth and then coming up with cross-functional KPIs. So the KPIs that Marcia mentioned, from the same system that everyone agrees our KPIs are going to come from the system, but also to make sure that they're not competing. You know, finance and procurement, like we have to reduce cost, and then like logistics and operations has to like meet a 99% service level. Okay, you know, something's got to give, people. So then how do we come up with KPIs that are actually realistic, that everyone has bought into and understands why this matters? And that goes back to bringing people who are not in supply chain into the conversation. I will say that I attended a conference maybe about 1.5 years ago, and the chief supply chain officer at a very large enterprise company mentioned one thing that they had done that worked very well. And I've never seen this, so like don't take word as bond, but they had a required supply chain and S&OP training that different business leaders had to attend. So like salespeople had to attend supply chain training, finance had to attend supply chain training. And within that, it was just like literally learning, oh, this is how what I'm doing affects everything else operationally, and this is why it matters. So that at least got buy-in for people to participate in the process.
Well, that's that's very interesting, and I guess touches one of the enablement levers that we sort of mentioned at the very beginning, which is training, right? I mean, how important is to get people up to the challenge, and I think that's an amazing viewpoint for sure, Dyci. I want to sort of pick one of the comments that I think you mentioned, Marcia, and you sort of somehow reiterated that, Dyci, is that there's no company, unless you guys tell me if I'm wrong, that can claim safely that they have perfect data, right? Who has perfect data? Raise your hand if you can say that your organization has perfect data. Sometimes we use that argument, you know, to sort of justify the fact that we're not starting a data initiative within the company because we're waiting for the moment when perfect data is available, so now we can run analytics. I'm afraid to say, at least this is my experience, that moment is not going to come, right? So the perfect data moment is not going to come. There's no organization that actually, at least from my experience, can claim that safely. So therefore, it's a matter of starting, right? So starting and assuming that there will be a journey to achieve like better use of your organization, right? What do you think about that statement?
Could I jump in here, Hugo?
Sure.
That's okay. I mean, the reality is like, yeah, like as we all know, there's no such thing as perfect anything, number one, and there's nothing that's ever 100%. But if I try to simplify, if I think about S&OP, really to simplify it, it's about having conversations about the right things and looking forward, really, and everything else supplements that in that process. So even if your data is not perfect, is it good enough? And is it good enough to get various stakeholders talking about the right things and making decisions? It's never going to be perfect. And you're never really going to know the outcome until you're past that point of time in the future anyways. So there's no other future-based database model that's going to give you everything with perfect clarity. We know that. So I think it's what's good enough, what's solid enough, and what's timely enough to support a good process. So you're talking where people are talking about the right things to balance demand and supply, and that's okay. And I think that expectation, whether it be onto S&OP practitioners or trying to sell it to the rest of the business, that everything's going to be perfect. It's not, but it's going to be about getting the right people together to talk about the right things, and everything else will flow from that.
I always recommend. It feels so great to be able to like say, I always recommend, but also this is what I do. I used to just only recommend stuff, but now I can also do it. It's directionally correct. So, it's not going to be perfect, but it's better than nothing. Can we at least start to like go in the right direction of an idea? The most recent S&OP like project that I tried to kick off, like it wasn't great. We were missing data points, but with what we had, was it directionally correct? And was it an improvement in just buy as much inventory as possible to make sure we don't run out? Yes, it was better than that. Was it perfect? Also no, but I think the other thing to remember, and especially in the manufacturing space, the idea of continuous improvement resonates with everyone. You are always looking to continuously improve what you're doing, and your S&OP process, the data related to your S&OP process, is nothing different from that. It's not a set it and forget it. We did a project. As the business changes, as different data becomes available or becomes cleaner or able to use, it's very much a maturity spectrum, or like a growth cycle, not really like growth, like you want to continue to do it. So get started somewhere. Something is better than nothing. And a lot of people might say, well, I don't really agree with that, because if we start with bad outputs, then isn't that just going to be like putting us in a bad direction? Well, in theory, no, because before you had nothing, at least now this is bad, so you know what to fix. Like you can diagnose what needs to be fixed, as opposed to if you never start, then it's just never going to get better.
Yeah, and just to jump back into that, so those are all great points. So to build on that, in my experience, the number one killer of a momentum or a good discussion in an S&OP meeting is your data's wrong, or your data doesn't match my data, and you get in this, like, you get completely sidetracked as to whether something is at I'll just throw out a fake example. So whether last month your widgets were at 92% fill rate or 96.5, the reality is it's not 99 and it's not 50. So it's somewhere in the middle. But the point is, what are the issues and what do we need to work on? So, I would suggest pragmatically, if as we're pulling the data, which obviously takes days and weeks, as we talked about, if you get pre-alignment with other stakeholders that may have issues, or other experts in the business that are kind of the mini SMEs of data, get pre-alignment with the data and what you're going to share and the topics prior to the actual meeting. And even if it's quote unquote wrong, if you're aligned, it's good enough for a productive conversation. So try to just stay clear of those data gaps by getting alignment prior to a meeting, and you'll avoid the debate of the data's wrong in very specific S&OP meetings that kill momentum. So I would just say do that pragmatically, and then there really is no right or wrong if you're aligned in a certain context.
I love that approach, because I think we can make mistakes, right? In particular, if we start working in a new company or with a new team. So to have that collaboration or engagement of the other teams will prevent you from mistakes. That to me is like a key item, a key action item that we can take. Now, the challenge is how we get the others involved and interested in what we are doing or in S&OP. So I think, and this is based on practice, on just being on the ground doing this, one of the key aspects is to have the data in the language of the other stakeholders. Mm. Like, for example, finance, right? They don't understand the unit. They really don't care. Sorry, but it's like that. I know before getting into supply chain, I didn't understand when people talk about lead time or delays. They just want to see profit, cash flow. So we need to be able to put the data in a way that they understand so they can help us. The same with marketing. Marketing will talk about cases. But for supply planning, they want to know maybe pounds. They want pounds. So to have those conversions with the data helps to the conversation, to have those conversations that that Ray and Dyci were talking about. I think those are like practical action items that we can take that will improve. I know, like Dyci said before, it's not going to be perfect, but at least in the right direction.
I think something that I was saying before of like bringing sales and marketing and finance into the S&OP conversation is also the other way around. Like we also have to understand, you know, what Marcia just said made me think about a project that I had last year when I was talking to the inventory planner about where inventory was in different warehouses and how much he was ordering, and he was doing cases. And I said, okay, but what's the value of that inventory? And he said, that's not my problem. That's for, you know, insert the person's name in finance. I was like, well, that's not really true. So I'm like, okay, is this a teaching moment, or like, how do I handle that response? But it's also, the onus is also on us, you know, as the people who get S&OP to help to bring everyone else along by speaking their language. So I'm just plus oneing what Marcia said on that piece. If it's dollars, if it's a conversion, like whatever it is, we have the data, we know what the data should be. So we, you know, I know we're already doing 150 to 180 man hours of work, but this is also like, put another 3 hours on there to do the conversions as needed.
So essentially it's making data make sense for every single stakeholder in the organization, and sort of how integrated, but with, you know, speaking the different languages of different people across the organization, right? And making sure that that happens to create that engagement that is required in the process. So we got a few more minutes because I would love to leave more time for questions. So everyone sort of in the audience can also have questions. I see a lot of interaction in the chat. So that's amazing. So we're going to have some time for questions for you. So the last question that I have for the panel is around sharing some tips, some successful things that you have seen, practical things that you have seen working in organizations that have helped, you know, improve certain of the some of the S&OP outcomes for either in your organization or companies that you have worked with. So open the floor for any of you that would like to add some final words before we go into questions.
I have a quick one, which we didn't talk about already. One of the biggest things that I've seen, because I think a lot of people kind of overlook the idea sometimes, and maybe not within this group, you know, perhaps preaching to the choir, but the role that user adoption and like execution actually plays in all of this. You can have a great plan, you can have a great system, you can build out all of the dashboards, but if people don't actually use it, then it really doesn't matter. And what I've seen in a handful of occasions, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm always going to say this thing. If I never, like, I have to make sure I say this thing, is having an empowered, like senior enough person within the organization who is responsible for user adoption. So like their thing, like their KPI is making sure people are actually using and executing. And that means that they then are empowered for like training, like they get a training budget, they get continuous improvement budget and resources. They are senior enough and empowered enough and have enough political clout to where when they see an email about this, you know, preparing for your next meeting, making sure you come to the meeting prepared so that we're not having, you know, data discrepancy conversations, people actually do it, as opposed to, you know, a junior resource or not senior or empowered enough resource trying to claw their way to the top. There is a very senior, empowered, politically, you know, powerful resource within the organization who is accountable for user adoption.
That's amazing. That's a great tip. Ray, Marcia?
Yeah, I think that usually is the S&OP practitioner. That's the challenge, right? So, but I think the support and really that executive leadership that can be either the council or that resource to make sure that that happens from a user adoption perspective, that's really important. So, yeah, and I think it's a great idea. I think it is, but I think it has to, like, depending on the organization, but it actually has to show value to the people that are involved. So you can't kind of force it, but you kind of got to invest in, and at the end of the day, it's what's in it for the people that are going to attend more meetings and do more work. So whether it's increased service or better transparency to the sales team, whether it be clear and more locked plans for the manufacturing team, like the stakeholders have to start getting stuff out of the process. I would say in that 4 to 6 month range. The first couple of months are going to be a bit bumpy, but trying to deliver the value, even if it's small, early on, and then build that momentum, that's going to be really important. And then, you know, the user adoption follows. But you gotta really deliver some value. But even if it's modest, that's okay, as long as you can celebrate that and then replicate that to a bigger effect. So
amazing.
Don't try to do it all in the first 6 months.
Marcia, final words
Yes,
before we go into the questions?
Yes, similar points, and like Dyci mentioned, that person is really important to have, because sometimes we have many reports and then they are not using, our stakeholders are not using them, or so it's important that the tool that we provide or the tool that we build together, yes, they are being used effectively. And one of the key points that I think are helpful for S&OP is to have that collaboration. So I mentioned before about the data, but also to start with other functions, to start talking with them. My recommendation from what I have been doing is like, I deliver, as Ray was mentioned, I deliver some value, some work. I do work, and then it's like, okay, now I can ask questions. And I have seen like the opposite approach, like, okay, I need to ask all the questions to understand. But to me, it's easier, like, I do some work that, of course, is not going to be perfect, but at least they see the interest in understanding them, and I can get in that way more engagement and help with the data to have an effective S&OP in place.
Amazing. Amazing. So as we reach close to the hour here, so we have time for 1 or 2 questions. So please, if you have any questions, put it in the chat and we will go from there. Any questions, team? Olivia, you wanna manage this part of the conversation? You're gonna come back to say some final remarks. But
yes, of course. If anyone wants to ask any questions, you can pop back on, like turn your camera on if you want. If not, we can jump in.
So there's a question from Tom here.
Okay, so the books will say, for example, schedule demand planning meeting. Instead, figure out what meetings are creating the demand plan currently and ask to attend them. Help them become more effective.
That's my approach also. One thing that I've learned is to just be quiet and watch people do things and understand why they're doing stuff before I'm like, hey, you guys are doing this all wrong. Like, you should be doing it my way. Because sometimes there's a method to the madness, and a process or a workflow was created to where maybe people recognized at the time that this isn't perfect, but this is what we have now. And really just kind of sitting and watching and understanding why things are happening, as opposed to just trying to immediately change them, I've seen be a lot more effective than the like coming in with PowerPoint slides and Gartner research as to why this is never going to work.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a good point. Okay, so does your company, this one's from Maria, does your company have a dedicated master data management team? Not sure if that's for everyone. Also, Maria, you can pop on your camera if you would like.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll just jump on this one. So, I mean, I've seen the evolution where the master data person was literally one person in the corner that took requests to set up new SKUs, to now like companies that have evolved and realized that like the data just it's everywhere, and to govern it specifically, you know, with appropriate ERP and kind of AI tools, you really need a team and a department to run it. I mean, I don't know the number of resources, but ultimately it's a function. It's not an afterthought. So a lot of the more mature companies are seeing that that's going to be extremely important to not only correct the past, but maintain moving forward. And sometimes you have to do both. And that requires their appropriate level of resources, because without it, and I guess, you know, to simplify would be trying to, like, S&OP is a structured process, but trying to roll out or build maturity of a structured process on unstructured data is never going to work. So you need the resources in master data to make it work. So the more evolved companies definitely have a team. So it's a great question.
All right, we will take.
I've seen a mix of both.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I've seen a mix of both. To where, to Ray's point, the more mature companies have master data ownership. And whether it's a person, whether it's a team, whether it's a cross-functional team of one person from like each functional area, but there is someone who is actually someone who is accountable and responsible for master data governance, continuous improvement, like checking systems integrations, like it. And I've seen it lately falling under like data engineering or data architecture. And that team, and I always ask when I'm starting a new engagement or just like out of curiosity, does that team sit under the business or does it sit under IT and tech? Because that's also, you know, it can get, you know, is business doing it with the support of IT, or is IT managing it with the support of the business? Because then that structurally, like that organization chart changes and the responsibility changes. And then I'm gonna plug, what are the best training programs that you've seen for S&OP? Me and Marcia's training. Duh, those are the best.
Yeah, I let you take that one over. I figured you guys would.
Hours.
Hello, that's why we're here.
What I have seen is like data management in large organizations separated, but the function is responsible for the quality, like for checks. Let's say procurement, right? The procurement or materials doesn't create the bill of materials, the BOMs. But if they see anything wrong, they need to communicate with the data management team. So it's a hybrid approach.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks. Since we are at the 1 minute mark, thank you so much, everyone who joined the conversation. Thank you for your questions and participation. Of course, thank you to our amazing speakers. You shared some really great insights. There is just one more thing we want to share with you before we go. So a big part of S&OP is inventory. So I just wanted to share actually a free tool that the OWL put together for anyone that's interested. I will share my screen. Not sure if you can see it. You guys good?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So it's free, no cost. You can just sign up with your email. It will basically allow you to benchmark how you're performing against competitors. So If you want to drop down and pick like the food industry, for example, choose companies in the US, whatever company size, 100 million to 500 million. This tool actually pulls data from publicly traded companies. So you can see which companies are listed down here. And then you can actually measure your inventory performance against like competitors in your field. So you can see what the inventory turn is on average, inventory days of supply on hand, inventory of percentage of sales, etc. So if that is something you're interested in, let me know. We can send you a link to sign up for free. Otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and feel free to follow us on LinkedIn for more content and upcoming events. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll send out the recording after as well via email. All right,
You guys,
take care.
take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.